Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hit a grand slam homer out of the wells of the U.S. Congress today in a historic speech. And Vice President Kamala Harris, the presumptive Democratic nominee for president, was a no-show. I'll have all the details coming up on In Focus. Hi, from Chicago, Illinois. I would tell you that it was sunny or cold or hot or windy if I had any idea, but actually, since very early this morning, I was doing pre-game analysis and post-game analysis of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's epic speech at the U.S. Congress today for the U.S., the Israeli, and the Australian and British media. And now I'm talking to you about what happened today and what it was all about. And before I do that, and related, not to worry, I just want to give you an update on where I was over the past 2 weeks. So I just arrived in Chicago to visit for a while with my family here after spending 10 or 11 days on a cruise with Hillsdale College from Hillsdale, Michigan. It's a great liberal arts college. It's also very pro-Israel. Christian and pro-Israel in Hillsdale, Michigan. So they invited me to be one of the speakers on their annual cruise. It was in the Mediterranean, went to ports in Monte Carlo, in Corsica, and then in Italy and Spain, which was pretty neat. Never been on a cruise before. And I didn't get seasick, which was really great. But none of this is important. What was interesting to me is that I gave 2 speeches on Israel. And the first one was supposed to be on Israeli politics, but I opted to talk more about Israeli society and how cultural shifts in Israel are going to be impacting Israeli politics going forward. And this was a very pro-Israel crowd. And in that speech, I talked about the incredible heroism of the Israeli people. I talked about the Collins and brothers who drove down from their homes, from their communities in South Hebron Hills, down to Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th. And Elsanan Tannenbaum, who's a major in reserves and also was an officer in the Mossad, he and his brother and their brother-in-law went down to Kibbutz Be'eri. Nobody called them. They just went. And they saved 90 people before Elsanan was killed in acts of heroism that are just mind-boggling. And I talked about Moshavnik Davidian from the Gaza envelope area that went to the Nova Festival in his private Jeep, and he saved over 100 young people from being massacred by the Hamas terrorists just in 15 loads of his car, bringing people out of the killing fields and to safety, and then going back into the killing fields and saving more and more and more people. So I told the stories of the Israeli heroes that day and about our soldiers. And it's true that the stories are very inspiring. And a lot of people in the crowd told me that they were crying when they were hearing what was happening, but they were also shocked. And that was what was so incredible to me. They had these people, again, these are people who support Israel, who love Israel. And they had never heard the story of the Israeli people at war, what we've been going through. And obviously, this is partially their fault because, unlike you, they don't watch the Caroline Glick show. Hopefully now many of them are watching. But they didn't hear these stories because the stories of Israel have not been told to the global audience. The only people who hear them are the Israeli people in our media. And even there, you have to really look. You have to go to Channel 14, where I work, to find them, because most of the news media is just on the left, and they're like MSNBC, but in Hebrew. And so they had never heard these stories. They had never heard these stories. They had no idea of the heroism of the Israeli people. And so it was after I got the response from the guests on this cruise to my talk, both of them, but that one in particular, that I realized how desperately needed Prime Minister's address to Congress today actually was. When you realize that even the people who love Israel have not heard the story of Israel, you realize the depth of the misinformation, the disinformation, the non-information that people have received about the war and about Israel at war over the past 9 months. And so it was clear to me just, for forever that Prime Minister Netanyahu needed to make this case to a global audience, needed to make the case to the American people first and foremost, but really to the world. And this speech was his first opportunity to do it. Let's not forget, he was not invited to Washington by President Biden. He, has not, I don't think he's left the country. I think this is the first time that he's left Israel since October 7th. And, he's been busy running the war. But I mean, President Biden didn't invite him to Washington. He came to Israel, but he didn't get but he did not invite Prime Minister Netanyahu to come to the United States. And so he never had a venue to deliver this speech until now for 9 months. And during these 9 months, again, even people who love Israel, what they've been served is a diet of demonization, delegitimization, and criminalization of Israel at the hands of most of the media, not only in the United States, but in the world. And what we've seen, obviously, over the past academic year on the college campuses, even in high school campuses from coast to coast, is the demonization, delegitimization, and criminalization of Israel, and the lionization, unbelievably, of Hamas and Palestinian terrorists and Palestinian society, which overwhelmingly supports the atrocity that Hamas perpetrated on October 7th. So, the need for that speech was enormous, and then Prime Minister Netanyahu gave it, and the speech was, like I said, it was a grand slam. And the reason it was a grand slam is because he told the story of the Israeli people. He told the story of what Hamas did on October 7th in enough vivid detail in order for people to remember what happened that day. And then he talked about the resilience of the people of Israel. He talked about the heroism of the people of Israel. He talked about the hostages, and he brought released hostages, and he brought hostages' families to Washington because this is their story. And he brought our heroes to Washington. He brought 3 incredible Israeli soldiers who ran into the fire of war in order to defend Israel on October 7th and afterwards. And he told their stories in the gallery of the U.S. Congress to the lawmakers from the Senate and from the House of Representatives, and through that venue to the entire world. And he brought them to Washington, along with released hostage Noah Gamani and Iris Chaim, whose son Yotam was killed after he and 2 other hostages had escaped from captivity, and Israeli soldiers didn't know that they were hostages, and they thought that there were terrorists coming at them, and they accidentally killed them. And it was one of the worst days of the war, but also showed the incredible heroism of the hostages who were willing to do anything for freedom, to risk their lives. And they died free men, which was incredible. They freed themselves. And his mother, Iris Chaim, who has become a symbol of national resilience and determination, was also in the gallery of the Senate for Prime Minister Netanyahu's talk. And so for Israelis watching it, it was an incredible moment because it was the first time that the Prime Minister had the opportunity to tell our story and to see incredible response of the U.S. lawmakers. I mean, I think the count that I saw was that Netanyahu got, 51, somebody else said 53 standing ovations at that speech. It's incredible. The speech lasted for 55 minutes, and there were 51 standing ovations during those 55 minutes. It's just an extraordinary tour de force on his part, but also an extraordinary receptiveness on the part of the Americans in the Congress to the story of the people of Israel. And so it wasn't just that he did that, and that he also brought the humanity of the people, that we have been so dehumanized, that he described the humanity of the people of Israel. And it was just an extraordinary moment. And he also put the demonizers in their place, which is the garbage can of history, because he didn't mince any words. There were no apologetics. There was no on the one hand, on the other hand. He said that the students who are rioting and rallying and demonstrating for Hamas, that they are Iran's useful idiots. And they're getting applauded, of course, by Khamenei and the Iranian regime for doing this, for acting as Iran's useful idiots. And, he called them out. He called out the presidents of the American universities who said that, genocide, calls for genocide of Jewry have to be contextualized, and all the rest of the gobbledygook that they've been serving up in the U.S. campuses all this past year. And he also showed that they could be stood up to by praising, remember those frat boys from University of North Carolina who prevented the Hamas protesters from taking down the American flag, and they were holding it up proudly on their campus, and they became national heroes because it wasn't because they did anything particularly crazy. They just stood up for America. And then, it was that kind of clarity that he was able to also explain. It's not just that Israel is humane and that Israel is heroic and that Israel is just. It's that Israel is America's ally, that the people who want to kill Israel, the Iranians and the circle of fire of proxy forces, of terror armies that Iran has raised against Israel now, waging war against Israel on 7 fronts today, that their first enemy, their biggest enemy, is the United States of America. And that they're going after Israel because Israel is America's mini-me, because in the eyes of the Iranians, Israel is the first target, but America is the main target. So that Israel's war, in a very serious and foundational way, is America's war, and Israel's victory is America's victory. And so standing with Israel means standing with America in this contest, because it's a contest not only between good and evil, it's a contest between America and what it stands for, freedom, and the forces that want to extinguish freedom on earth in the name of jihad, in the name of jihadist Islam, and in the name of hatred and a cult of death. So this is the truth of Israel's war. It's the truth of the Israel-America alliance. And he was able to really, hit all of the major points. He talked about how the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, the UN, are accusing Israel insanely of the crimes that are being committed by Hamas, right? That they're accusing Israel of starving Gaza. And for Israelis, it's unpleasant to hear how well fed the Gazans are, because we know that they're starving the hostages to death. But he said, he gave the data. We're being accused of starving them to death. Gazan, every Gazan man, woman, and child gets over 3,000. It's actually over 3,500 calories per day. The 40,000 aid trucks that Israel has permitted to enter Gaza since the beginning of the war. I mean, it's just a total lie that Israel has the lowest civilian to combatant ratio in the history of warfare. And he cited the work of Colonel John Spencer, who was a guest on this show, who has described Israel's incredible skill at preventing civilian deaths. He talked about the fact that, he quoted without naming her Kamala Harris, who had been the bad cop in the administration since the outset of the war. And she said that Israel must not go into Rafah because the civilians there have nowhere to go. Well, Israel was able to remove all the civilians from from Rafah, and you had the lowest civilian to combatant ratio in Gaza. In Rafah, again, in Rafah, not just in Gaza, in the Rafah Battle of Gaza, that the U.S. government was so opposed to, that Kamala Harris was attacking Israel and said, don't you dare go in there. And she wasn't the only one. She was the most outspoken one, because otherwise you're just going to kill all the civilians. Well, no. In fact, the opposite happened, that was a battle that had the lowest number of civilian casualties in it of all the battles that Israel has fought to date in this war. So he was able to put paid every single one of the lies that has been thrown at Israel by the demonizers, including inside of the Biden administration, but also in the halls of the universities and on the streets of the cities of the United States. And I had been very concerned about his speech ahead of time, whether he could make it, whether it was a good idea to do it, because I was worried about the hecklers on the one hand, and he was able to neutralize. And there were plans for people to protest his speech from within the congressional hall where it was held. I think it's the House of Representatives where they do these things, and there was a lot of concern. And there were I got internal communications of various groups that were planning on heckling him and attacking him during the speech, not physically, but heckling him and blocking him from speaking. And I was very worried about it. But by not talking about just making it a programmatic speech or whatever, but talking about the people of Israel, he gave them no opportunity to heckle. What are you going to do? You're going to heckle Kfir and Bibas's grandfather? You're going to heckle Noah Rumani. You're going to heckle the war heroes of the IDF that were in the gallery of the hall. I mean, you can't, right? So he was able to disarm them and prevent them from using the heckler's veto in his speech by the way that he crafted it. And it was really, really wonderful. And I was worried about the political landmines that he was going to be walking over. And those landmines have only multiplied exponentially practically in the past week or two since Biden abdicated the race and transferred the baton to Kamala Harris and made her the presumptive Democratic nominee for the presidency in these elections unexpectedly and under duress. So, I thought that this was going to be just a political landmine. And, here too, with artistry, and I say this as a writer, he was able to praise President Biden, for the assistance that he gave Israel in this war, while also saying, the faster that you give us the weapons that we need in order to win, the faster we can win, which was explaining that the problem with weapon supplies still exists, that he's still slow walking the arms that Israel requires in order to defeat our enemies, particularly Hezbollah in this war. But he was able to do it while praising Biden for the assistance that he's given Israel to date. And he was also able to give President Trump the fulsome praise that he so well deserves for all of the things that he did for Israel during his term in office, things that stabilized the Middle East for most of his term in office, in a way that, on the other hand, since Biden came in and began reinstituted Obama's plan to recalibrate America's Middle East policy by removing American support from Israel and the Sunni Arab allies that the United States has long cultivated, and transferring American allegiance to Iran and empowering Iran and its terror proxies at the expense of America's allies. So that's been the policy that was a policy that Obama initiated. And since taking office 3.5 years ago, this is the policy that President Biden has been implementing along with Kamala Harris and the rest of their team. So he was able to bring all of this out without naming names, with giving equal praise to both Biden and Trump so that nobody could claim that he was interfering in the election. And he even gave Kamala Harris her due by not naming her, but pointing out how crazy and wrong-headed her criticism of Israel and its war has been. So that was all extremely important. And finally, I was worried about the protests. I was very worried about the protests. I thought, oh my gosh, you're going to have thousands of Hamas protesters on the street in Washington, and God knows what they're going to say and what impact they're going to have on the discourse. And it's very worrisome to me that he's going to be going there. Aside from the security issues, which we'll get to in a second, I was worried about, who was the media going to listen to, and whether they were going to actually be able to temper the public support for Israel that his speech was supposed to increase by castigating Israel by having effective demonstrations. So in the event, I'm just going to show you a little bit of the footage. If you haven't seen it yet, it's worth looking. What the Hamas protesters, I would have said pro-Hamas, but as you'll see in a second, they're actually terrorists themselves, were doing on the streets of Washington, D.C. while Prime Minister Netanyahu was speaking, and then in the hours following his speech. So first you see here at Union Station in Washington, look at what they're doing. That's right. You see, they're burning the flag of the United States. And in the first video, you saw that they were taking down the flag of the United States outside of Union Station in Washington, D.C., and replacing it with the Palestinian flag. And let's not forget, this is the flag, those flags that soldiers wear on their uniforms, American flags, Israeli flags, etc., that they have sort of as patches on their vests and stuff. So on October 7th, the rapists, the murderers, the baby killers, the kidnappers, they had the flag that people were hoisting up on the flagpoles outside of Union Station in place of the American flags. They were wearing that flag. That's the flag of the terrorists. That's the flag of terrorism. That's the flag of genocide. That's the flag of rape. And that's the flag that these people were putting up in Union Station. But of course, that's not all. Look at this one.
Back up! Get back! We're back, you idiot! We're back! Shut the up! Get the off him! Get the off him! Shame on you!
That's right. As things started heating up, they actually started beating up cops. These people are beating up cops. What is that? That's terrorism. That's mob violence and terrorism. And, we shouldn't forget, Noah Pollack posted this on Twitter, my friend. He showed that the same pictures that we're seeing, the graffiti for Gaza at on monuments in Washington, D.C., the same, sloganeering, the same everything happened a month ago. These people were they doing? They were setting off firecrackers and smoke bombs outside of the White House. Nothing happened to them. No steps were taken against them. They weren't indicted for supporting terrorism, providing material support for terrorist organizations, for hate crimes. They weren't prosecuted for anything, even though they committed multiple felonies a month ago in Washington, D.C. And today, not only did they repeat all of those crimes, but they also committed assault and battery against police officers in the line of duty. Okay, they could have killed them. It's an attempted murder, if you want. And they're all hate crimes because they're carrying them all out in the name of the annihilation of the United States and in the service of genocide of the Jewish people. If that's not a hate crime, I don't know what is. What's going to happen to them? You think the Department of Justice is going to go after them? We'll see. Time will tell, but experience tells us that the answer is no. No serious prosecutions have been leveled against any of the people who support Hamas, who riot on behalf of Hamas, who terrorize American citizens, including Jewish citizens, first and foremost Jewish citizens, in the name of Hamas, in the name of genocide. Nothing. And here, just one last video to show you because whatever, we're on a roll. Here they are outside of the Watergate Hotel. I guess this is the second last video. This is outside of the Watergate Hotel. Listen to what this guy is screaming. And kill the Jews. Kill the Jews.
Allahu Akbar! We're gonna kill all of you! We're gonna kill all of you! All of you!
Listen to this. This is in Washington, D.C. What happens to this guy? He's not even covering his face. He's not scared. He doesn't think anything's going to happen to him. You think anything's going to happen to him? Time will tell. And then here's this last one. This I woke up to. This is in the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C.
حطوك من رعب من الارض نطلع زي جن بخ هدي اللعب على الهدى نترك على النار الافكار تنبخ تراك ورا حدا اذا بلغ انا مش مركب بركبش مع حدا انا فين ان امكانيك البلد بالبقلك ديك بين رعوة غنم انا جيت انا ديك طلعت تحلم نحكي حكيكة دقيقة تنفهم فيش وقتها بضيع شباش حفيدي بديك في بلاش وقتش حبيبي اليوم بحتاجك اجيب نعمل ملك
They're maggots. They're maggots. They say that this Palestinian organization in Washington infiltrated the Watergate Hotel. They set off the fire alarm repeatedly throughout the night. Where was the Secret Service? Where was the State Department's diplomatic security? Where was the Washington police? These people were in the hotel that was housing Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Israeli delegation. Okay, and they brought in thousands of maggots and crickets, and they threw them all over the hotel to infect everything, to contaminate it, to make it unfit for human habitation, right? What happened to them? Anybody arrested for this? I saw a news brief that said that, around at the afternoon hours, the Secret Service was opening an investigation. Well, thank you very much. Where were you the night before when this was happening? Where was the Secret Service when they were setting off the fire alarms at 2:00 in the morning in the hotel? Why are the Israelis being protected? This is the visiting head of America's closest ally in the Middle East. Why is he being allowed to be treated like this? And this, by the way, goes to something I talked about a few months ago when I was in Washington. I drove outside of around the Israeli embassy there, and they've just been under assault for months. You've had these Palestinian demonstrators outside of the Israeli embassy with these pictures. They're, fake footage of the privation of the children of Gaza, portraying Israel as a terrorist state, right? That's carrying out genocide. And they're on the sidewalk all around 3 directions to the Israeli embassy. And they're just allowed to do this every day. And everybody who tries to get into the embassy, for services, for work, for whatever, they have to go through this what's it called? They have to go through this hostile environment in order to get to work in the morning. They have to go through this cordon of hate in order to get to the Israeli embassy. And this has been going on for months. And, whatever, right? Who cares? It's just Israel. They're allowed to be treated like crap by the Washington police, by the State Department diplomatic security, which is responsible for the securing diplomatic legations in Washington, D.C., but not the Israeli. So this has been going on for months in Washington against the Israeli embassy, and now they've been, dispersing maggots and crickets around the Watergate Hotel in the middle of the night, taking pictures of what they're doing, and nobody's being arrested for it. And of course, the day ends with them assaulting policemen, because why not? Look, they didn't figure nothing's going to happen to them. Are they wrong? But the thing is, so I was worried that these protesters were going to besmirch the good name of Israel. They're going to have these mass rallies that everyone will say, yeah, long live Palestine from the river to the sea and all the rest of it. And really what happened was that it sets up a perfect contrast, because here you had Prime Minister Netanyahu at 2:00 in the afternoon speaking before the entire world. And by the way, I was shocked because I thought in this news environment with the president and Kamala Harris and all the rest of it, and Trump obviously in the background, that it wouldn't get that much coverage. And in fact, a lot of the coverage that it got was, putting it into the framework of the American presidential race. But every major network in the United States and around the world was carrying it live, and the entire speech, again, this was an hour long, and people weren't cutting into it anywhere. And, all of the major news networks, not only in the United States, but throughout the world, were covering his speech live. It was the biggest foreign policy story in the world all day, that he was speaking at the Congress. So that really is a testament to the importance of Israel, but also to the importance of the event that Netanyahu came. And they gave full coverage to what he said. And then on the outside, you see all these people who are rioting, burning American flags, hoisting up the flag of terror and genocide, beating up cops, and calling for the murder of Jews while vandalizing and causing a public health scare in the hotel that's housing the Israeli delegation to the speech. So I think it was really contrast that did the work that a speech alone couldn't have done. By setting that up, it was pretty incredible, and it's hard to imagine that people can come away from that thinking, oh, let's support Palestine because they're the good guys. But obviously people will, but that's not the point. This was an incredibly important event for Israel, for the relations of the United States and Israel, and for the cause of freedom in the world and the fight against tyranny and murder. And so it was really important in that way too. And now, I guess we should talk about Kamala, who boycotted the speech. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because we're going to have the next several months, apparently, to talk about Kamala as much as we want to. And I'm just going to leave you with a few thoughts about what she did. Right. So first of all, as I alluded to earlier, Kamala really took on very early in this war the role of the bad cop to Biden's good cop and everything relating to Israel. Or John Kirby was always the good cop on the staff level. He's the spokesman for the National Security Council. So he was a good cop, and Kamala was a bad cop, and she was always the one taking the most outspoken positions against Israel and for Hamas. So, on December 5th, I did a whole show where I was talking about the way that she was using her position to demonize Israel from the outset of the war. She was in the UAE in December, and she gave this speech. It was on climate change. She gave the speech where she set out, 5 don'ts for Israel, essentially, and all of them led to, all of them together made it clear that the Biden administration's policy was to block Israel from winning the war. And that was, it was her pleasure to do that. And, over and over and over again, talking about having to reward the Palestinians with the state, after they committed the most heinous crime against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. So, this has been her line. These have been her talking points. She's been giving them with a gusto and enthusiasm that should make anybody blush. And so, and that's who she's been since the beginning of the war. She has a husband who was born Jewish. Who has a daughter who has been protesting for Hamas since the beginning of the war. And he's been put in charge of all of the fight against anti-Semitism in the administration. He should probably talk to his daughter Emma first if he wants to do something useful. At any rate, the strategy that the Emhoff chair, Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman, chaired Commission on Anti-Semitism came up with is no chance of protecting Jews in the United States from anti-Semitism because it doesn't label anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism, which obviously it is. Not only is it a form of anti-Semitism, it's the most powerful politically form of anti-Semitism we've ever seen in the United States. And so, they didn't label it that way. And they also made CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, which is, an unindicted co-conspirator in the Hamas Al-Qaeda financing trial of the Holy Land Foundation from the Bush years. And so CARE was given a place at the table for fighting anti-Semitism in America, even though CARE-sponsored groups have been at the forefront of all the pro-Hamas riots and protests in the United States. So, this was an incredibly hostile strategy that the Biden administration adopted under Emhoff. And here's Kamala. So, why is it that she boycotted Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech? Why is it that she said it was more important for her to speak to some sorority in Indianapolis than to chair the meeting as the president pro tempore of the Senate? And I think that there are 2 main reasons that she did it. The first one is she didn't want to, like I said, Netanyahu received over 50 standing ovations from the members that were in the audience and from the audience in the gallery while he was speaking. And I think that Kamala Harris didn't want to have her picture taken applauding for Netanyahu because she knows that her base hates Netanyahu and hates Israel. So she didn't want to be in a position where her picture was taken supporting Israel. That would be bad for her as the optics as she comes into the convention in Chicago next month, because they're expecting riots, and if she were there, then she would definitely be rioted against. She'll be rioted against anyway, just as the police that were protecting the Israeli delegation ended up getting beaten up later in the day. So I think that's fairly clear. She's going to get rioted by her Hamas supporters anyway. But that was probably the first reason. And I think that the second reason is because she is the bad cop. Many people were hoping, I saw a lot of Jewish Americans who were expressing the hope that now that she's the nominee, she's going to be more of a centrist. She's going to be more pro-Israel, to be aligned with the American people whose overwhelming support for Israel was expressed by their elected representatives in the Congress today. So she's not going to want to go against, according to Harvard Harris, a consistent 80% of the American people publicly. But on the other hand, she doesn't want to anger her base, which is the 20%. So, she represents the 20% of the administration. She has since the outset, and she wants to continue to do that as the nominee, because I think that this is what she believes. And so she didn't want to have her picture taken supporting Netanyahu, and she is continuing in her role of bad cop by boycotting his speech. And yeah, she'll meet with him, whatever, who cares. So, I gave, and now that we're done talking about Kamala and what she did in her strikeout today in her first act as the presumptive Democratic nominee by not coming to Netanyahu's speech, I did, like I said, the pregame shows and the postgame shows on the media in a series of interviews all over the place. And one of my interviewers asked me, who do the Israelis want to win the war? And I don't know, suddenly I was feeling diplomatic and all that, so I didn't want to say the obvious answer. So instead I said, the Israelis want Israel to win. That's who Israelis want to win. And in the American presidential election specifically, Israelis want the candidate who supports Israeli victory to win. And it would have been, that'd be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I don't think I have to tell you that answer. I think you can probably guess. And you have a more than 50% chance of being right. Anyway, those are my thoughts today. It was a great day on so many levels for Israel today. We also got 5 hostages, unfortunately, all deceased, but we were able to bring back the body of 5 hostages. And I want to leave you with this incredible clip that I saw earlier today of the soldiers who rescued the bodies saying Kaddish over these fallen hostages, these murdered hostages, who finally had somebody say Kaddish over their bodies after 9 months in captivity. And I'll leave you with that, and watch it. You'll see again the face of the Israel that Netanyahu presented so eloquently today to the U.S. Congress and to the people around the world. We're watching the speech. We'll see excerpts of the speech as time goes on. I'm Israel Chai. See you later.
גדל וקדש שמי רבה, אמר נברא כבוטר, נמלך מלכותם, יצמח וקנה וקרב ושיחם, וחי ישראל. מעליו ועליו והיה יתברך, צבח, נפער, ויתרומם, מתנשא, ויתעלה, ויתעלה, ויתעלה. שווה לקודשה ברחוב, נעלה מכל גחתה שירתה, שבחתה מלחמתה, ירען בעלמה וליבוע אמן. על ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידיון, ועל כל תלמידי תלמידיון, ויסכים מאוד את המשכן.